Today on the Roundhouse, we're talking to a chief mechanical officer who's under 30 and why it's important to give those under 30 opportunities to lead in rail preservation. All aboard!
In days past, the roundhouse was where the railroad worker united with the steam locomotive, each to prepare for the journey ahead. Today, it's where we examine the history, the industry, the machines, the hobby, and the passion behind railroading. News, interviews, stories, and more. So climb aboard. This is The Roundhouse.
Welcome to The Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Ozarek, and this is episode number 105 of our Trains and Railroading podcast, where we're talking about everything in the industry and the hobby, you name it, and we discuss it. Today, we're talking to Scott Jarrett. He is the Chief Mechanical Officer for Cincinnati Scenic Railway. They are a tourist line collective out in Western Ohio. We're going to be learning about his experiences with them, the kind of operations and equipment they have, and his road to get there, which includes stops at the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus Train and Amtrak's Beech Grove shops. Before we get to that, though, I want to thank you guys for your patience in waiting for this episode. I know it's been, if you're listening to it when it came out fresh, 2 months since the last episode, and I apologize for the delay. I had a move. I am now in Lexington, Virginia, having moved from northwestern Pennsylvania. But that meant a lot of unboxing, boxing. You know how it is when it goes with moving. I recently did a talk about the podcast, and one person in the audience asked me, "What's your release schedule?" And I immediately felt guilty and thought, yeah, I probably do need a regular release date for the podcast. So hopefully within the next couple of months, I can come out and say, this is going to be a regular release date. But we're going to get back onto a monthly schedule nonetheless. I also want to thank our newest Patreon supporters, Behul Badaria and Todd Herman. Thank you guys so much for supporting the Roundhouse on Patreon. If you have listened to this show for months, years, and you believe in what we're doing here and you want to help the channel grow, visit patreon.com/theroundhouse, and just even $1 a month goes a long way to helping offset the web costs and allowing us to do some pretty cool event episodes, especially once COVID restrictions continue to lift. Thank you guys so much for your financial support. And now, let's talk to Scott. Our guest today is the Chief Mechanical Officer of Cincinnati Scenic Railways. Please welcome to the Roundhouse, Mr. Scott Jarrett.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Nick.
What is Cincinnati Scenic Railways?
Well, Cincinnati Scenic Railway is the nonprofit side of our operation, essentially the top of our umbrella. We're based out of Lebanon, Ohio, which is just north of Cincinnati. And we operate the Lebanon-Mason-Monroe Railroad and the Ohio Rail Experience. We are, per our mission statement, nonprofit organization operating historic railroad equipment for the education and enjoyment of the public. What that means is we're not a museum, but we operate historical equipment, and one of the largest fleets for a small operator in the Midwest. We do trips from Lebanon, 5 miles. We do trips all over Western Ohio on trackage rights on the Indiana-Ohio Railway, G&W company. And we also work with the Cincinnati Dinner Train and work with operating it as well. So we're the busiest excursion railroad that anybody's never heard of.
That's right. I'm curious to learn more about you. I was driving back from the South recently and passed through and had the chance to see the Lebanon, Mason, and Monroe Railroad in action. And it was a nifty operation to see, but it made me more curious about what you have going on. Is this, as a nonprofit, all volunteer work, or do you have a mixture of staff and volunteers?
We have a very few volunteers actually, and we justify this. One, the nonprofit side is one part of the triangle. We have other businesses that are involved that all come together under the nonprofit. The nonprofit is the umbrella, so that every penny we get that isn't towards operations goes right back into the equipment and securing equipment that matters to us and to these ops. We have, I can't even tell you how few volunteers, because we have a strong belief that we should pay our employees, because one, most of our employees are under the age of 30. I'd say 40% to 50%, depending on the year. So we need to give folks a reason to want to come in and treat it like a job. And secondly, we have very little, even though we have a huge fleet of equipment, we have very little work where it just sits around. It's on a slow schedule, where it could be volunteer, where we could mess with schedules. So we have a small paid staff to make sure that that happens, especially our administrative side, which any large nonprofit has to have some administrators keeping things going day to day. We only have three full-time managers: the president of the company, myself, and the train master. So very little goes into the payroll compared to what we put into the equipment, the operation, the track, etc.
Has the organization always been structured in this way, or did it take a while to build up the momentum to be able to have a substantial amount of part-time staff?
It's really, our railway started in 1986 when the Indiana Ohio Railway, which had been running Rail Expo, which is a whole nother, we could do a whole podcast on Rail Expo. But they had been working with them and decided, when they got their Lebanon and Mason lines, to start running passenger. Now, this is in the 80s, when Conrail's selling lines off, and people actually, the insurance premium was low. So they could do anything. So they did. They got 4 coaches and they started running this city to city operation. The freight railroad was sold off to Railtex, which became Rail America and then Genesee and Wyoming. When that happened, the passenger side of it was kept by the original owners and spun off as an operation in Lebanon that also held trackage rights across the entire Indiana Ohio Railway, as long as it was fully owned by the Indiana Ohio Railway, which means that they could do train excursions when they wanted to, and they have over the last few years. Um, but with that, they really didn't. It still was just a back and forth in Lebanon excursion train, like many of the other small operations across the country. When the 2010s came around, we had a change of management in 2015, 16, sorry, where the president of the organization, Ray Kammer, came back. He's my boss. Hi, Ray. Uh, and he started running with the idea of the Lebanon operation is what keeps the local population interested. That's where you do your small excursions, your Easter bunny trains, your Christmas trains, your just train rides where people come out and ride an hour-long train. But we have this immense opportunity to take it further and do more with these trackage rides. So we started doing twice a year the Ohio Rail Experience. And at the same time, that's when the nonprofit was formed, so that we could justify being able to do both operations at the same time and not have to dump money into keeping the back and forth operating, but to actually apply for grants for historic cars, for historic equipment, to do these excursions that would take us from being this small operation that, the locals know about, but nobody in Florida is going to come up to Ohio to ride 5 miles in Lebanon through the woods. But we do these long excursions with this historic vintage equipment, and that changes the game. It took us from that railroad in Lebanon to something that can parallel steam excursions, something that can parallel the Autumn Colors Express, and be in the light, so that when we apply for grants to restore, or when we apply for, organization, going to organizations and saying, hey, we do this train operation, we have more than just we're the railroad that ping pongs back and forth.
In your intro, you say that education is an important part of the mission. The scalability factor, having both the small 5-mile hop and the longer experience, help to cater to different elements of the public and further that. But what are some ways in which education is central to how you are orchestrating these experiences?
Our big thing is essentially reminding people that trains aren't that track that sees one train a day. In the short term, we've really brought interest back to the rail lines we operate on, especially when we go offline. In Lebanon, when we're not doing the event trains, because with the event trains, there's not enough time to really dive into the education side. But when we're not doing the event trains, our staff on board are dedicated to telling the history of each car. I don't think a single car on our train doesn't have a dedicated story to itself. It's not just a coach that was on Metro per se. It's actually got a history. And we do a very good job of telling that. When we go further out, we're able to bring people that have not been to Ohio or Western Ohio or thought of it into the history of some of the most amazing short lines sometimes ever built. We travel along the DT&I Railroad and tell the history of Henry Ford owning a railroad, which most people don't know unless you're into trains. I know probably half the people are screaming at the screen like, yeah, duh. But normal people don't know that, and we get mostly people that just want to go on a train ride. Just like dinner trains, normally people ride a dinner train to do something different. They don't ride it because it's a train with a dinner on it. Being able to grab that and then tell a story with it is what our job is when we're in motion. Our dinner train does a fantastic job of that. It's not ours. I'd take that back. The dinner train does a fantastic job of that because the owners of it have dedicated time throughout where they actually will talk in person to their cars about the locations they're going through, the railroad history and the local history. And more people have learned more about the west or the east and southern side of Cincinnati by that than living in it sometimes, and they'll tell us that. So we go further with the personal side than many places do.
Provide us an overview of your equipment. What are some of the notable pieces, and what do you have in the collection in general?
Oh, well, we have 46 pieces of equipment, going to be 7 locomotives starting this year, including the oldest continuously operating GP7 locomotive, CNO 5704. And that engine has never gotten a total rebuild, nor has it ever been off mainline service in its entire career from the day it was built to now. only small work or being out of service for lack of need, because we have so many locomotives, are the only reasons why it's not been in service in its entire life. We also supplement that with 2 nickel plate GP30s, which is amazing that we have 2 of the last 5, excuse me, and of the 3 that have not been gutted, we have 2 of the running ones. Nickel plate 901, 902, which 901's back in its original colors, and 902 is we're doing a fundraiser for right now to put back in its original colors. We have also, on top of that, coaches from the Erie Lackawanna, which it seems like every railroad got a few of those back in the 80s. But there's some of the lesser changed ones. They still have the original seats from New Jersey Transit, the original windows. We have a 1942 built Bud diner we are currently in the middle of a heavy restoration in, the Hummingbird, and a very odd series of cars after that from the ex-Army I'm having a moment here. Commissary cars, the shorty bags Amtrak ended up making. One is our power car, one is our small commissary to an RPO that we're going to be working to turn into a large open air commissary come this fall in theory. Everything in the world abiding. To leased equipment that we actually is not owned by us, but we work closely with and lease, including the tail car of the last Capital Limited, the Wawasi, and its sister car, the Shenango, which was directly in front of it for that last run. We have those cars on property that we'd use for certain events. And a mess of cabooses. From a DT&I caboose, multiple C&O cabooses, NW, Wabash, Chessie caboose that we actually rescued from CSX last year when they were removing a rail yard it was landlocked in. And we took it and pulled it out working with a trucking company and brought it back to our lines. That matches our Chessie locomotive that we just saved, the 6955. We just ran a fundraiser for to get saved from NRE, which is closing, and they've been a great help working with us to sell it at a lower value and transport it and do the work to keep it rolling so we can get on property and start tearing away at it piece by piece. So we have quite a bit of equipment, and that's not even all of it. The dinner train, which is a partner with us, but not under our purveyance, has cars with their own stories that are all immaculately restored. And then we also have some other locomotives and cars that I cannot say what they are or where they're coming from, but that are also equally impressive and have been a joy to work on, but soon we'll be releasing that. So something to look forward to after this.
I feel like your tagline is going to need to become Cincinnati Scenic Railway's home of the GP30s, with 2 and a third one on the way.
I don't like admitting to that, but there's days.
Well, I'm curious why you don't like that, because from a foamer perspective, I suppose I like the Jeep 30 because it's just a very distinct looking thing. But mechanically speaking, is it not wonderfully unique, but more of a headache?
There were worse that EMD put out. I've worked closely with close to us organizations that had much worse. The Jeep 30s we currently have, luckily, are the nickel plates, so they didn't have dynamic brakes. So that rips a whole third of the electronics out of the thing. That takes a lot of the complexity out that most GP30s have. The other thing about them is they were freight used lightly on short lines. So the only thing we really have had to do is change turbochargers on them, because uh, blown locomotives like the Jeep 7 that we have, they can idle all day long. They can putz around on the 5 mile short line, barely in notch 2, and have no problem. Uh, Turbocharged locomotives, and especially Jeep 30s, do not like doing that. If they're not wide open all the time, they get cranky. And that's really the only issue we've had, is our engine's just not getting run hard enough, which is the saving grace of our Ohio rail experiences. We go 25 mile an hour with 15 cars behind us. It gives them the workout they've needed the past 20 years. So we don't have as many issues as most say. Now, the chassis unit, I will say, needs quite a bit of work. We got it knowing this, and making sure everybody else knew it. It's to keep it from turning into razor blades. So it's not a rushed project. That will be a labor of love versus our other engines, which we do care about. Don't get me wrong, but they are workhorses. They pretty much have a year-round uptime, so they get what they need when they need it, and we stay ahead of the game, and that's why they run the way they do. Um, Better. I disagree with the foamer perspective, is what it all comes down to. It's just we got lucky too. I'm not going to sit here and say Jeep 30s don't have their problems. We just have some of the lesser problemed ones.
You can admire the look of it, but respect the complexity that may come with the nature of a machine, whether it be steam or diesel.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And diesels, I have never really cared for steam. Fighting words, I know. But our our diesels especially all have a very specific story, a very specific. You can treat them like people because they all have a different personality. We have a small enough fleet where you can actually see that personality and not just treat them like equipment. Um, but with that, by being able to spend that kind of time with them, you know what the complexities are, how to plan around them, and what to do with them. We do have the one of the greatest locomotive mechanics that is not at a large railway as a contractor, Mr. Mike Schreiber, from Silcott Railway Equipment, and having an expert that knows the complexities, but also knows, like, it's complex, but just forget about it. Stick this piece of paper in blank and it'll be fine to get you through. And then we just remove blank because it's unneeded. That makes a difference from smaller operations that can't call mechanics in, that have that expertise and that can't make those decisions. Uh, in not intelligently, wrong word, but make those decisions without knowing it will be okay when you do it. And that makes the difference. It really does.
Clearly, working on this equipment, you have to build a trust in your equipment and you have to build the trust in your team. On a day-to-day basis, Scott, what do your roles entail? What are the roles that build that trust?
Well, I've done more than be the chief mechanical officer. We're small enough to where I handle the day to day with the mechanical, but with an amazing team of more experts than me, helping me along with that. I really, on a day to day, handle from the time we start the generator on the cars and start the locomotive to the time we shut them down is my job, to make sure the operating crews are aware of procedures, helping them put the train together, making sure everything works properly. I work very closely with our operations, as our train master and I have an understanding that we joke about all the time. It's not a tense understanding, but we joke about it. I handle the train when I handle what moves. He handles it when it's moving. So it's my job to make sure the crews understand how it needs to operate. You've got extra two cars and their disc brakes, they're loose, the pads are worn, whatever. They might not add any more braking force. So be prepared to start a little sooner, quit a little later. Hey, the one locomotive just for some reason doesn't like notch 5 this week. So don't expect that to work. And understanding and having a personal connection with the crews, as well as I'm engineer and conductor. You'll find me in one of the seats quite often. We work very closely with the operations side, and at a normal railroad, the CMO does nothing with the operations. Once the train's moving, it's not his problem. Here, I sometimes don't leave the thing until the day's done. On top of, I work very closely and sometimes even manage our we call them passenger conductors, coach attendants for other operations, but the people that are talking to the passengers. So I help give them the insights to what the equipment's doing, what weird thing it developed because it's 60, 70, 80 years old, but also the history of it. Why is it doing this? When there's a breakdown, a lot of places will say, hey, it's broken. Sorry about your luck. We'll work with you. I have a philosophy that not only me, but our staff should tell the people, hey, it's broken, but it's broken because it's 70 years old. And here's the fascinating part about that. This car didn't have air conditioning when it was built. So the air conditioning that's in it just is kind of kit bashed together, and not everything fails at once. And people really appreciate that. And my staff really appreciates knowing instead of just kind of having to wing it for a lot of this. And with that, I've also pulled from our operating staff and our onboard staff for a lot of my mechanical staff. I'd say we do 20% heavy mechanical, air brakes, all the stuff that when you think trains, mechanical, you're thinking lifting cars and welding, and that's only 20% of our job. The other 80% is just keeping the train rolling back and forth without people being upset all the time, whether it be our staff or our passengers. And because of that, I can pull, I can pull very inexperienced people that don't have that railroad experience into my staff, and sometimes just go figure it out, because I don't know either. If you break it, we'll fix it. That's our job. So you develop a close, very tight-knit operation where everybody says we're like family. We're not like family. We're a very well working team. Understanding that everybody has their ups and downs, but at the end of the day, you don't have to deal with this. You can go home and get away from it and come back with a different frame of mind the next day. And it seems to work well. It's had its bumps, but it seems to work well when we're working at it.
Good that you have that routine and that mentality built up. I'm curious, though, how did you build your career to this point? Because if you don't mind me revealing this to our listeners here, you're 26, which is pretty young for a chief mechanical officer. And I think it's great to see somebody closer to my age heck, even younger, to be able to get into this kind of role. I wondered if you could share your path from childhood to getting to this point.
Yeah, buckle up because this story has quite a few. It's a roller coaster, to say the least. So, yes, I am 26, and trust me, in this industry, being 26, you get more. Well, we'll wait till you're mature enough than anything. Um, I have, I hate that statement with a burning passion at this point. But that's because of the story. And it all started, I was a kid like anybody else. And if you are a kid under the age of 6, trains are cool. If first you cannot like a train, there's something, you either have something that's a bigger passion, or you just are soulless. Uh, we My dad and my grandpa would take me to see trains going through Moraine Yard here in Dayton, Ohio. And because of that, trains are cool when you're young, when you're little. And so, of course, I wanted a model train. So I had an HO layout, like any other kid that's looked at a train gone, whoa. Um, and I ended up not really caring for trains. I ended up caring for building the city, city planning. It's, Sim City, but with models, because Sim City didn't exist in my world till I was about 10. So I didn't really continue a love of trains past that. I loved building the city, but I had a loop around it. That was it. And I didn't go around trains again until my high school career. And pure accident. I got a job at Kings Island because when you're a teenager, roller coasters are cool. Um, and if they're not, then sports are cool or whatever. There's something that everybody connects, but you either like roller coasters or you don't when you're in your teens. And the coolest job ever to somebody that had this engineering and like city planning is working at an amusement park. So I got a job at Kings Island, and I was late in the hiring session, so they gave me two options. You can work on the log flume, which I don't care for water, or you can work on the train. Yeah, that's cool. That's fun. So I got to press a button and give a hand signal on the amusement park train for a year. And there I met a man at the Lebanon Mason Monroe Railroad who was one of their high up passenger conductors named Jim Carson. And I can blame my entire career on him for going, hey, you're good at doing this and you seem to like doing this. You want to come work on the passenger train? And I said, you know what? Why not? Because it's same thing as running the amusement park train, right? And this is the point where most people laugh me out of the room. Uh, but when you're 15 to 16, that you don't realize that yet. So came to the L&M, and on my second day at the L&M, we had a massive failure of the engine. It would only go forward, wouldn't go back. Electrical problem that I understand now, then, and had to help with a massive train evacuation in the middle of nowhere. And something about that caught me and made me go, all right, this is different. This is cool. And so you start looking into trains, and you realize that the class 1 conductors and engineers, and they make tons of money, and you're like, oh, cool. This is a viable job. I was planning on going into the Air Force. Had already got everything set up for it. And due to reasons that don't need to be listed here, medical stuff from when I was a kid, they pretty much went, no, in my senior year. And with that, you just kind of like go, okay, plan B, trains. So as a 17, 18-year-old, you don't really realize, especially if you have no connection to this industry other than your small railroad, that being young doesn't work in this industry. So I applied, got denied, applied, got denied. because of the people ahead of me of our age that have messed it up for some of us. Always with the you're too young and other people have ruined it for you. We can't trust somebody your age, which sucks. And anybody that's listening will have had that conversation at one point if you're trying to get a career in this. Some might get lucky, but somebody will have that conversation with you once you get in. And it took a couple of years, but I kept working at the LM&M, kept doing my research and helping when I could with mechanical or operations, and started working towards being a conductor just to get the license. And I ended up leaving the LM&M because Kings Island needed an engineer and needed somebody that could understand running the operations because they were changing the operating department. So I went back to Kings Island. And while I was at Kings Island, I met a couple people that worked at the Ringling Circus Train. And they offered me an interview. I drove up to Cleveland and they offered me a job. And that was the gateway. On the circus train, which I was there for 7 months solid. There's a few months of where I was there but wasn't because it's Ringling's crazy. But you do everything. The train crew on Ringling, from where the locomotives tie on to the end of that train, is your problem, and it's a team of 10 people. And so you do wheel change outs in the middle of nowhere, brake shoes out in the middle of nowhere, air tests, interior work, painting, electrical. If it needs done on that train, you need to do it because there's nobody else. And mostly nobody else that knows how to or has the time to, because the circus train was city to city, week by week. And that gave me the deep dive that I needed to be able to be a serious person in this industry. And when I left the circus train, which I left because I saw the writing on the wall and I didn't want to be there for the end. I left and went to Amtrak with a couple of stops in between, doing some private car work, but that's here nor there. I went to Amtrak next as a pipe fitter and sheet metal mechanic. And because of the union environment, I didn't really get to do a lot, but I got a lot of experience working in a shop, working in a union location. And because of my previous operating experience, because of my time that I had spent at the circus train, I was able to apply what I knew and not be well respected because I was still 25, 24. Actually, sorry, younger than that. I was 22, 23. Time goes by when you're having fun. And certain people took notice. And so in my free time, I ended up making friends back here at the Lebanon Mason Monroe Railroad, Cincinnati Scenic Railway, which had just been founded. And so I would work at Amtrak through the week at Beech Grove and come down here and then work the weekends here, helping with mechanical, helping operate the train because it was a mess. And doing that, they caught notice at Amtrak that I was able to handle operations and moving the train back and forth. So I became an inbound, outbound train inspector and operator. So when trains would come into Beech Grove and then leave Beech Grove, there was a crew that worked at night that would build the train and break it apart at the time the Hoosier State was running. But even now they have some for their hospital train that they run off the Cardinal. And so you get a crash course working with other airmen, other pipe fitters, other electricians in how an operating train on Amtrak has to work. and fixing it in a pinch. You only got 3 hours to turn around sometimes after you switch it. On top of operating the train and operating a passenger train, America's only passenger train that goes across the class ones regularly, you get a very good understanding of what the expectations are at the highest level and can drop that down. So I took that, and they canceled the Hoosier State, and I came here to the Cincinnati Scenic Railway and said, hey, I'm looking at changing careers. Why don't, if you need something while I'm in this transition period, will there be work you need me for? And the president of the company, Ray Kammer, said, why don't you just come work for me? You already know the train. You've been here all the time. You have enough of an understanding to not be dangerous versus somebody that's just crash coursing it at a scenic railway. Why don't you come work for me? And I said yes, because what wouldn't be a good capstone to be a manager at my age? Because the only other people I know our age actually that are management and railroads are foremen, and they're not respected for one, but they also have no say. They're entry level. They don't get to really make decisions. They're just there to keep the lights on and the people in motion. So to actually be able to help make command decisions and help bring what was the L&M Turtle Creek Valley Railway into a full excursion capacity has been a privilege that not many people will get. I just happened to get lucky a bunch of times in my history and got to hear. So it's not inspirational because it's just a lot of dumb luck and a lot of sleepless nights.
I would disagree with you. I think that is highly inspirational because I'm listening to this and you've got a CV that rivals folks twice your age, and that is impressive. And yes, you lucked out with the opportunities you got, some of which no longer exist, such as the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus Train, which is no more. But it was through demonstrating your knowledge and making those contacts, your drive did fuel you. So it's a matter of being prepared for the luck that came your way.
That's true, and that's a very good point. A lot of times I was not offered these jobs seriously, especially with the circus train. It wasn't, I knew anything. I didn't when I got that job. Same with Amtrak. I didn't know what Amtrak did. It was going into these jobs being very humble. And even though I could go and be like, yeah, that's how you do that, you don't say that. You just kind of let them tell you, and then look like a freaking genius when they go, all right, go figure it out. And they're talking to each other and like, he's going to screw this up. He doesn't know a thing. And then all of a sudden you're like, I'm done. It's right. Yeah, I'm done. And that can make a difference. That helped me quite a bit when I was on the path to where I am.
I'm still reacting to that. That's a really cool story, Scott. And it's great that you made the most of those opportunities to get where you are. And subsequently, going back to something else you said at the beginning, that now the company as a whole is making similar opportunities for younger people to start their careers with. I think that is so great. Obviously, not everybody's auditioning for chief mechanical officer.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
Well, maybe some people are, but there's entry-level opportunities in this portion of rail preservation, in this portion of tourist railroad operation, regardless of skill set, pre-existing or not, as a way of getting young people interested and demonstrating that there is a potential. It's certainly not going to be everybody's permanent career path. Doesn't need to be. But if given the opportunity, and given your, as an entry-level employee, willingness to, as you say, be humble and learn, that you can take those skills with you regardless of if you're continuing in this field or going on to some other career.
Yeah. And that's what, when I got into this position, like I said, my boss gave me the opportunity, and he is very into giving others that opportunity. He's gone through down the same path, but there was this thing in the 90s where in preservation railroading, where if your dad was into it, you were in. And their generation had that, but their generation didn't have that continue. So there's a gap right now. And I everybody always says that we need to get more interest in trains. I disagree. I have been doing this 10 years now, for a decade, and there are more younger people interested now than when I was in high school, than when I was getting into this, because of the internet, because of everything. The problem is there's not, let me backtrack. The problem is there's two problems. One, a lot of them are content with being with their friends and just doing what they want to. They don't want to have a job. They don't want to volunteer. They just want to go see the trains, or they want to go model the trains. They have their space and they're content in it. And that's fine, but that really hurts operations where you need somebody that's interested in trains. Not everywhere has our example where I can get somebody that's not interested in trains interested in doing the work we do as a mechanical department, because it's not about the trains, it's about doing the work. And a lot of people love doing hands-on work. You don't have to like trains for that. The other problem is when somebody does come in, especially what I've had is when somebody comes in and because they've been exposed to it so much through opinions on Facebook, opinions on in the industry and all of our forums. I mean, we're just as guilty as the people that are falling into it to be putting out bad information and bad opinions and negative opinions. You're getting people that come in with an attitude that aren't, as they're excited to learn, but they think that by the end of the year they're going to be where I am, that they're going to be, I'm still learning, and they think that I'm done because I have to be the done one of everybody. And that's a problem. And I've talked about this with a lot of people, and cracking open the groups and getting people involved is as easy as getting rid of the gates. Getting rid of the reason people model and do these routes and do these things is because sometimes it's stuff that's not impossible, and you're bringing stuff that's been gone back to life. And that's awesome. But a lot of it is, when I've talked to people, there's no way for them to get involved. Even though these groups are screaming for help, at the end of the day, they're still gatekeeping. And that's something that the older generation has to change, and has to change now if they want to survive. The other the other side of that is when you have somebody that knows trains, that's younger, that's under 30, because that's the threshold age. Once you're over 30, you will be taken more seriously, and unless you're under 30, you are not going to be taken seriously. Unfortunately, that's the threshold age. But under 30, you get a bit of an arrogance that, well, I've seen this and I've seen that, and I know trains. Well, you may know trains, but you don't know anything, and I would use a different word, about railroading. Railroading is different per operation. We're different than Cuyahoga Valley Railroad, which is the closest mainline passenger operator to us. Ohio Railway Museum's different than us. 765 and Fort Wayne Historical is different than us, but we all do the same thing. We move trains back and forth. But at the end of the day, we have different equipment, we have different groups and different operations, and everything's different. So you don't know anything coming into these places. And what I said earlier, where going into that first job, going into those first opportunities, that mentality will get you run out on a rail. Joke intended. But they will run you out over that. And you can't have that. You have to go in humbly going, I don't know anything. And if you do, if you go, oh, okay, that's easy, whether it be operations or mechanical or whatever, if you go, I've seen that on blank, you don't say it. You don't act like you know. And if you screw it up, that's fine, because you didn't know anything. And that's where people with the success stories really do succeed at our age, versus people that, and I've had to deal with it, that do know, that they know, and they think I'm being mean or being harsh when I say that this is a small fishbowl. You can't be arrogant. Somebody else will see that and tell somebody else. You can ruin it all. You will get the opportunity, but if you do it again there, it's just going to happen again. And that's not something that the old guard can change. That's something that the younger generation has to understand. And just understand that it's like going to McDonald's. I don't know how fryers work. You have to go in excited to do the job, but not knowing how to do a job you've never done.
In an effort to work against the gatekeeping that prevents people from joining the industry, your organization and your president and your leadership have worked hard to remove unnecessary gatekeeping, to give people opportunity. Because of that, and because you recognize that you are dealing with a lot of younger people and a lot of folks for whom this may be their first job of any type, if they're young enough, how do you balance being able to let them in and educating them with recognizing that there are bad apples and there are ones who this isn't for them, or they need something a little bit lower stakes initially to get used to maintaining a job? How do you find that balance? Because I think that some of that gatekeeping you described exists because people are afraid some young person is going to really screw it up in a bad way, and that somebody could get hurt, because if you're a tourist railroad, you are dealing with massive equipment that can potentially hurt people. So how do you guys find that balance?
Well, a part of it is because of the safety aspect. The other part is because when somebody is eager but not able, is the best way to put it, short term. Sometimes it can be very annoying when they don't when you can straight up tell somebody, hey, this isn't working, you need to do blank, and they still keep doing it because it's funny or because it's all they've known socially, which is a whole another ball game. What we do, and I'm still learning. I've only been doing this 3 years. The first year, I just kind of was inherited a team that worked well together, and college broke that up. And that's kind of part of it, is we have understood that people will rotate out. You can't plan for these younger people that are good to be here forever. But if somebody is able and wanting to, you hold on to that and you foster that, and you give them the opportunity to grow. The other side of it is, if somebody is leading on to be an issue, I always give too many opportunities to folks like that, because if I wasn't given the opportunities I wouldn't be where I am today. But the opposite side of that is, once there's multiple people that have that bad feeling that this is going nowhere, it's over. And the few I've had to remove, the answer is always the same, is they need to go do something that's not something they love, that they have to do, and to get that understanding of the processes, of the social side of things, of that the risks are not just you'll lose your job or you get yelled at, but it could cost somebody their life or their arm or their leg. um that's not us, because the risks are sometimes too high, or it's a cost factor where it's not the risk is too high, but the just straight up, you're wasting our time that we could be spending it somewhere else, factors too high. And it's unfortunate, but sometimes on our side, we just have to let them go. um but we tend to give a little more chances, because people younger people tend to need them. I was no different. um we also, when somebody is good at what they do, we give them the opportunity to continue being good at what they do. We If we have a tight knit team, we bring in more people that can continue fostering not only the passion, but the idea that at the end of the day, we're doing something really cool, and you want to be there when the really cool thing happens. When we take our excursion trains out and run the 9-hour trips, if you're not working, you're allowed on that train. And I actually will pay some of my staff to come on it, so that the fruits of their labor can be seen, so that they can be there and understand why we have suffered to get to where we are. And that really does seem to bring out the best in it. And we'll talk about the good that comes out of it. I have one of my staff that has never cared about trains, mind you. He doesn't do trains because he likes trains. He does trains because he just came here with his friends, and now college has happened and everybody's gone each other way, but he's still here because it's a fulfilling job. And we're able to know that he's able to handle tense situations, and he's in the military, so he's gone through training, and that makes us confident that even under 20 years old, he is going to be a conductor. Whoops. um he is going to be a conductor this March at 19, on a class 2 regional railroad scale, which is unheard of. I mean, really unheard of in our industry. But it's because we were able to notice that and keep moving with it. So it's a mixture of everything, and having that open mind, but knowing when to go. All right, so this person gives me a bad feeling in my stomach. Hey, other manager, does this person also give you bad feeling in stomach? Okay, he needs to go work at Steak and Shake for a bit, before he comes back. Or he needs to just be a passenger attendant. He should not be anywhere near a moving train. But also when it's like, hey, this person's doing good, or this person needs a little help, but they're doing good at something. Let's keep pushing that. Let's keep them interested. And it's worked so far. Um, Everybody has bad eggs. And honestly, you can't beat yourself up over your bad eggs. That's something I've struggled with is we've lost a few people that just wanted to burn the house down on their way out. And for no reason other than they didn't get what they thought they were going to get, and that was it. And that doesn't make everyone of that age group bad, of that mentality bad. And I more than anybody have had to remind myself of that because I'm seeing it firsthand out of people, and they go into their communities and they try and poison their communities, and then I hear about it because the fishbowl in preservation railroading and passenger railroading is very small, and you don't poop in it because then it will come back. And you just can't let that get to you as even another employee. You just got to go, okay, well, too bad for them, let's move on. And it really makes the industry better when that happens for all the younger people, when everybody just kind of forgets the bad eggs.
Hashtag keeping the fishbowl clean.
No kidding.
So much to look at then from what you're doing. At the end of the day, Scott, what do you enjoy most about your role within this organization?
The best part about what I do is once we've done all the nitty gritty, once we've done the awful restorations of cars that have been 80 years old plus, that are full of the vitamin A from to just rat's nest, literal rat's nests all over the car, is once we're rolling, once that engine's idling in the station in Lebanon or we're out on ORE, is being able to sit down, sit back, and watch people light up when they get on our train or when they're around our train and are blown away by what we do. Because for me, the interaction with our passengers is part of the best part. Because at the end of the day, I get on the train and I'm just another passenger. I don't tell them what I do. I just talk about it because it's not me that did this work. I've facilitated it, but it's my team. From the engineer running the train at the time to the passenger attendant talking to passengers and helping them on board to the person cleaning the toilets. We're doing something that nobody else is doing in this country. And when I talk to people and tell them what we're doing, they believe me, but they're astounded. And it's always a good feeling to know that we are the best of the best at what we do and that we can take pride in it. But then I can also sit back and just watch it happen. Watch people have the moment that I had as a kid when I was sitting in that rail yard. And they're not sitting in a rail yard. They are riding the train that a lot of people never got a chance to and just saw go by. And less people were riding back in the day, in the history. They're in those same cars, seeing it as the people would have. And you can see them process that. Their eyes light up, the smiles come out, and the comfort knowing that this is one of the cool things they'll never forget. That's something that's very special to me, and always makes it worth it at the end of the day. Every time I step on the train, I have to remind myself to have that moment, and that moment sometimes doesn't come easily, but every time I do, it makes it all worth it. And going forward, as we get better at what we do, as we get a closer knit team, we are doing stuff that I couldn't even have fantasized as a rail fan. Most rail fans can't think about happening because it's not allowed to happen. And those moments where I'm the only person that gets that opportunity are cool. But when I'm able to share that with 300 people, that's what makes it worth it at the end of the day.
Wow. You're blowing me away right here, Scott. Hopefully, as things continue to open up here in early 2021, we'll get to see more of what you have going on with the Ohio Rail experience and the Cincinnati Scenic Railway family of things in general. Thank you so much for coming on the show to discuss the work that you're doing and your history with it and how you're looking to grow it. It's been fantastic to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. And we're very excited to move into the next year. We're planning to come back swinging. Like I said, a lot of stuff I can't release yet because it's got to get nailed down. But if you can look at our past, the excursions and trips we've done, that should give you an idea of how big we can make things go. We have the Nickel Plate Historical Society Convention in Cincinnati this year. We're going to have an all nickel plate locomotive train, 2 locomotives and all cars with the city of Chicago and the Nickel Plate 90 on it. We are going to be bringing ORE back. Last year we went to the north end of the DT&I and towards Blissfield, Michigan. Well, this year we're headed that way again. Doing trackage that hasn't seen passenger trains other than excursion trains since the 1930s. Sorry, private excursion trains, not some you could buy a ticket for. So we're doing some cool stuff coming up and gain some cool equipment, and it can only get better from here.
Sounds like a good plan to me.
And now, the question of the day.
Last time on the Roundhouse, we were talking with Avril Rowlands, the creator behind the British TV series God's Wonderful Railway, and thinking about the creative storytelling possibilities that shows like her explore. That led me to ask you guys to pitch me your railroad TV series. And your imaginations ran wild. Here are some of the ideas that you guys came up with. First, from Brian J. Smith, Feasting on the Footplate. How to cook darn near anything on a shovel or locomotive backhead when the railroad superintendent goes home for the day. That could be unique. From Keiji Muramoto, a docuseries on the formation, tenure, legacy of, and the people and steam engines involved with the Norfolk Southern Steam Program. Good suggestion, Keiji, and truth be told, now that I'm down here in Virginia, I've connected with some folks who were previously involved with the NS Steam Program, and at the very least, could make for some good podcasts. Jonah Snyder writes, my railroad television series would be inspired by Great Scenic Railway journeys, but would instead highlight lesser-known railroad museums and tourist railroads, giving them some much-needed time in the spotlight, and hopefully get them some much-needed revenue. Frank DiStefano writes, a gritty drama on the plight of the Chinese railroad workers building the Central Pacific. And Christopher Kovacs writes, I feel the Roundhouse could work as a TV show itself, done in the style of Top Gear, a feature journey instead of a challenge, sprinkled with a locomotive or restoration project overview, like Steam Locos in Profile, and a guest interview to make a full program. Chris, I love that idea. Let's make it happen someday. And if you want to see things like that happen and grow what we can do, please consider subscribing to us on Patreon, patreon.com/The Roundhouse, or if you go to the show notes for this on theroundhousepodcast.com, you'll see where you can subscribe. And hey, at $5 a month, you get early access to every single episode a week in advance. So please consider checking that out. Your question of the day for this episode is, where have you found success in rail preservation? Feel free to interpret that question as you will. Let me know on the roundhousepodcast.com. We have links to social media there, Facebook, Twitter, and we love to keep the conversation going in between episodes. I really appreciate all of your support the past couple of months as there's been this hiatus up to this episode. Hopefully, again, we'll get back on track soon. There's some really exciting things coming in the pipeline for this year that I can't wait to share with you. And remember, as always, the Roundhouse is our house.